Dale Little here in Cesnadilla, Romania, and this is the third part of as we're going into the book of Daniel, and I promise try to hold these to about 15 minutes. No, attention spans are short, and I may not be the most exciting teacher you've ever heard in your life. To improve as we go along here, but I've studied the book of Daniel for a long time, talked through it a few times, and so we'll see that uh, Daniel and his friends are here and been carried off to Babylon, and so to serve in the king's court, Nebuchadnezzar. This is a difficult thing for them, I'm sure. They've been taken from their homeland, and here they've got to serve the very man that destroyed their city and killed possibly the parents and others. And so we find that now they're having to serve them. And so we'll look at verse 8. How did they make it? They were commanded to eat the king's meat and for 3 years. And at that time, the king they'd be brought before the king, and the king would see if they were fit to serve in his court or not. And I assume if not, very well could have been executed at that time. I don't know. But probably if they weren't, Aspenaz, who was put in their charge and was charged with seeing that they ate the king's food from his table and the same food that he ate, and that they would be healthy both in mind and body, his head would be in danger if they didn't pull through and look with approval from the King Nebuchadnezzar. So they had a choice to make now. Daniel and his friends, they either break what they have been taught and go ahead and eat this food that they were not allowed to eat under their law because of the way it's fixed and different and what it was in some cases. But here we see in verse 8 it says, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Now, notice a couple things here. Daniel purposed in his heart. I remember a number of years ago that they had this campaign back home, and it was called Just Say No. And that was scoffed at and laughed at by the liberals. Well, you can't just do that. You can't expect kids just to do that. Well, not all of them would, but some would. And here, Daniel, if you're going to do anything for God, if you're going to stand, you've got to purpose in your heart. And you're not going to do it by accident. You've got to make a decision. And so Daniel made a decision. He knew the consequences, I'm sure. But here he defies the king in a sense and says, "I'm not going to eat that meat." But he didn't didn't say it that way. Look at it says, "Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." He didn't demand. He didn't do a protest and start to get the other guys together, people together, and start leading a march and refusing to do this or that. No, he just made a simple request, and he asked the prince of the eunuchs that he be allowed to try something different. Verse 9 it says, "Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. But the Lord was," I'm getting ahead there, but God gave Daniel favor with this prince of the eunuchs. I'm sure that, it says God gave it. I'm sure that Daniel's demeanor had a lot to do with it. It's how we respond to things that sometimes the Bible says, I think it's in Proverbs, that a kind word turns away wrath. And sometimes we just add to it because when someone says something unkind to us, we just lash back. Maybe sometimes there is time for that, maybe, but most times it's better just to say a kind word and not retaliate in kind. At least give it a chance to work before you start lashing out at someone that maybe has said something about you. And so we see that the same thing God did with Joseph. In Genesis 39:21, it says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison," there. And it was his benefit. Now, God gives favor, and he can give favor to his people, and we come into certain circumstances. I'll just relate a personal experience. And I don't say this braggingly. I want you to understand that. My grandson went joined the Marine Corps a number of years ago. I lose count quickly anymore at my age. I'm 72 now, so time flies really as you get older. And so it's probably been about 6 years ago, I'm guessing, that he went into the Marines, and he's out now. But he had faced some traumatic times just before going into the Marines and joining. I knew he was going to have a tough time. Always been a good kid, and I'm convinced that he gave his heart to Christ when he was 5 years old. He had a good understanding of the gospel. We took him to church regularly, and he loved it. We were somewhere one day, and someone left a little gospel tract, one of these comic book tracts, on a newspaper stand, and he saw it, and he wanted to know if he could have it. And so I kind of flipped through it and looked at it, and I said, "Well, sure." And so let him read it, and so I kind of liked it, and so I ordered some of those different ones, and we read those things to him until he memorized them. And he couldn't read yet, but he could. You'd think he could, because he'd go all the way through one of those things and word for word, just as if he was reading, because he'd memorized them. So he knew the gospel, and so I'm convinced at 5 years old, it's real unusual, but he had a grasp of what it took for salvation. And on his very own, invitation to church was given one day, and he responded. Said, "Papa, let's go up front and let's go pray." And so I went up with him, and that's what we wanted to pray about, and to ask God into his heart and forgive him his sins. And at any rate, here he is getting ready to go in the Marines. Been a good kid, and but I had some concerns, and I said, if I find out, or I see, or I think you may be straying too far from God, I said, I'm going to pray that God does whatever he has to do to get your attention. And so the first week I got a letter, and he was telling me, he said, "Papa, I just had to write and tell you." He said, what happened at chapel Sunday. He said, and it was a rough week. The Marine Corps is rough. He was down at Parris Island. And if you don't know anything about Parris Island, do a little research on it. It's a bad place, rough place, where they train the Marines on the East Coast. And so he had said God really spoke to him during the service, chapel service on Sunday. And he said, God had spoke to his heart, and he'd done some repenting. And so God answered that first prayer. And God answered every prayer that I prayed while he was at Parris Island. Now, I'm convinced that God was just giving me what I needed to be praying for, and then all I did was pray what God was giving me. And, if you do that, that's real prayer. That's prayer that God will definitely answer. because he's the one that laid it on your heart. Now, sometimes we've got things we want, and we think God should do things this way, and we think he should do it that way, and we pray for him to do it that way, but that's not the way he wanted to do it, and, because he sees better ways, and that's us praying out of our own spirit, and once in a while we hit it, and sometimes we don't. But I feel like God was giving me everything I need to pray for. And after that, that was the thing that got on my mind, was Daniel and Joseph, about how God had given them favor with those that they worked under and worked with. And so I began to pray that. I said, Lord, I said, you give him favor with those, his superiors and those that even, surround him. And so I got a letter the next time I got one was he talking about his drill instructor and said that, he'd been made, and I may have this terminology wrong. I think it was a scribe. Some of you Marines could straighten me out on that if it's wrong. But anyway, he assisted the drill instructor handing out mail and things like that. I don't know exactly what all entailed, but someone said, well, he'll keep that for a week or two and they'll give it to somebody else, what normally happens. But actually, he kept that position the whole time he was a recruit there. And unfortunately, one of the other drill instructors did not like that. My grandson had come down with bronchitis or possibly even pneumonia. And if you're going to get something like that, Parris Island's the very place to get it. It's nothing but a swamp down there almost. And a lot of the training areas is in the swampy area. So it's common to, have those type of things, infections and things while you're there. At any rate, he could keep up with his work. He'd do what was required of him, but except he couldn't, he'd lost his voice about, almost like I'm getting ready to, I think. But he lost his voice, and one of the assistant drill instructors who filled in on the weekends absolutely did not like my grandson. We found out later that part of the reason my grandson was like I said, Christian. I think he knew that. And turns out that this particular drill instructor, this assistant, was an atheist. And it was tough on my grandson at first. As a matter of fact, he said that at one time, he said he hated me and I hated him. But I got to the place and said, well, I can't just do that. And so he repented of that. But at any rate, I began to pray another prayer then. And, we don't have to be afraid of the devil. We don't have to be afraid of his people. They'll do some damage, yes. I've been knocked down before, but, we get back up. And I began to pray another prayer. Because this particular sergeant was trying to get my grandson recycled. And he wrote me, he said, this is something I have to do. And I put this out. His father had committed suicide just before he went in the Marines. So that was one of the trauma that he is facing. And he said, I have to do this. And so I began to pray, and I said, Lord, take that drill instructor out of the way or change his heart. I'd much rather change his heart, but I said, every which one. And, I got a letter back, and my grandson said, we haven't seen that other sergeant for a while. He hadn't been around. Well, as it turned out, his wife was having a difficult pregnancy, and he never did come back. And my grandson, then my last prayer was that my grandson be able to make that last couple of days they call a crucible. And thank God he did. And, if the enemy comes against us, God can take him out of the way. Nobody can stand against him. Bible says that he that is in us is greater than he's in the world. And so the devil can stomp and snort and And yeah, he can knock us down maybe once in a while, and he can do other things. But in the end, just keep trusting God and keep going on. Uh, One of my earliest disappointments uh, was as a young man in my 20s, and this right after I got out of the military. Boy, Satan come at me just as I began to grow spiritually and as a young Christian. And um, it's just like looking back, like Satan had just kicked my feet out from under me. And you know what? I didn't know what happened, so I didn't get back up. And for many years, I struggled. And God began to deal with me. And thank God um, I kind of strayed away from Him, but He never left me. And so, we just depend on Him. And now, when sometimes maybe He kicked my feet out from under me again, but you know what? I just get back up. Uh, because the Bible says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. And so, I don't do that stand down deal anymore. God will try to discourage us. And that's the biggest way, and I'll close with this. Satan primarily can only defeat us when we give up. When he gets us so discouraged that we lose faith and we give up. I think that's his biggest weapon. And so be encouraged and be an encourager and purpose in your heart. I want one of the things that I like about the book of Daniel is the practical things in it. And this is one of them. Daniel purposed in his heart that he was not going to defile himself. Purpose in your heart that you're going to continue on. I don't care how old you are, if you're a teenager, if you're old like me, or in between. Purpose in your heart and set your face and go with God. Let Satan throw at you whatever he's going to throw at you. Keep your armor on. People, just keep your armor on and charge forward. Dale Little, Rescue American Ministries.